A man in a $5,000 suit sits down at a poker table in the Hamptons. He's a basketball legend. A Hall of Famer. The kind of face that makes strangers want to sit across from him, just to say they did. What none of them know is that the deck has already been read. The shuffling machine beneath the felt isn't just shuffling. It's watching. This is not a heist movie. This happened in real rooms, with real money, and real people who walked away believing they'd simply had a bad night at cards. By the time federal agents were done counting, they say the losses ran into the tens of millions of dollars. The FBI director himself would call the allegations mind-boggling. And somewhere underneath all of it, four of New York's most infamous crime families were allegedly still doing what they've always done, taking their cut. This is the story of how a Hall of Fame coach, a former Lakers insider, and one of the NBA's most electric young guards allegedly became entangled with the mob, and how a joke of a card game in the Hamptons pulled back the curtain on a scheme investigators say had been running for years. Let's go back to the beginning. Not to the arrests. To the games themselves. For decades, high-stakes private poker has existed in a gray zone just outside the reach of casinos and cameras. Wealthy players, hedge fund managers, tech founders, entertainers, have always been drawn to exclusive, invitation-only games where the stakes run into six figures a night. It's a world built on trust and reputation. You don't need ID. You need a name someone recognizes. And that, prosecutors allege, is exactly what made it so easy to exploit. According to federal investigators, organizers in New York began recruiting something they allegedly called face cards, recognizable, likable personalities whose presence alone would draw wealthy players to the table. People who wanted to say they played cards with a Hall of Famer. People who wouldn't think twice about buying back in after a rough hand, because hey, Chauncey Billups was sitting right there too. Behind that friendly face, prosecutors say, sat something far less friendly. Members and associates of the Bonanno, Genovese, Gambino, and Lucchese crime families, four of New York's five legendary Mafia families, allegedly backed the games, funded them, and took a cut of the winnings. And the games, according to the indictment, weren't just backed by the mob. They were rigged by it. Here's where the story starts to sound less like a courtroom filing and more like a heist thriller. Prosecutors allege that certain tables used altered shuffling machines, devices that looked like ordinary automatic shufflers but had been secretly modified to read the deck as it moved through the machine. Some games, investigators say, went even further, specially marked cards, hidden scanning technology built into the poker table itself, and glasses or contact lenses designed to reveal what an ordinary eye never could. Picture it. A wealthy player leans back, confident in his hand, unaware that somewhere at that same table, someone already knows exactly what he's holding, and exactly how much he's about to lose. One game investigators point to took place in Las Vegas in April 2019. According to the indictment, both Billups and former NBA player Damon Jones were present. A rigged shuffling machine was allegedly used that night. One victim, prosecutors say, walked away $50,000 poorer, and had no idea why. That was just one night. Investigators allege the operation ran for years, staging games not only in Las Vegas but in Manhattan, Miami, and the Hamptons, moving from city to city, room to room, always with a familiar face at the table to keep the invitations flowing. By the time the FBI was finished tallying the damage across all the alleged rigged games, they said the operation had defrauded victims of more than $7 million. But money wasn't the only currency at stake. According to prosecutors, when victims fell behind on what they owed, the consequences didn't stop at a phone call. Members of the crime families allegedly used intimidation, and in some cases outright violence, to make sure debts were paid. Assault, extortion, robbery. Not metaphorical mob tactics from an old movie, federal charges, laid out in black and white, against real defendants. This was, prosecutors would later say, one alleged operation running quietly for years. But it wasn't the only one. While federal agents were building their case against the poker rings, a second and entirely separate investigation was unfolding, this one aimed not at a card table, but at the NBA itself. At the center of this second case, Terry Rozier, a 10-year NBA veteran, a former lottery pick, the kind of scorer teams built offenses around. Nicknamed Scary Terry for the way he could take over a game in an instant. According to federal prosecutors, the scheme centered on a single night, March 23, 2023. Rozier was playing for the Charlotte Hornets against the New Orleans Pelicans, the New Orleans Pelicans. Prosecutors allege that before the game, Rozier told a childhood friend, De Niro Laster, that he planned to take himself out of the game early, citing an injury. That tip, investigators say, didn't stay between two friends. Laster allegedly passed the information along to a network of bettors, who placed roughly $200,000 in wagers, betting that Rozier's individual statistics that night would fall under the posted lines. Bets that, if Rozier really did leave early, were almost guaranteed to hit. 9 minutes into the game, Rozier exited, citing right foot discomfort. He didn't return. For a moment, it looked like the perfect play. But according to prosecutors, the outcome wasn't quite as clean as planned. Rozier's stat line, 5 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, actually beat some of the betting lines that had been wagered against. Prosecutors allege that in the weeks that followed, Rozier and Laster met to count cash winnings at Rozier's home in Charlotte, and, according to the indictment, negotiated the agreed payment down, from a reported $100,000 to roughly $70,000, to account for the bets that didn't pay off as expected. If true, it's a strange kind of paper trail, a bribe allegedly renegotiated after the fact, like a refund on a service that underdelivered. Rozier wasn't the only name investigators kept circling back to. Former NBA player and Lakers assistant coach Damon Jones surfaces throughout both cases, allegedly helping run the rigged poker games as a face card, and separately accused of selling confidential injury information about Los Angeles Lakers players, including reports connected to LeBron James, to associates looking for a betting edge. And here's a detail worth sitting with: this wasn't the first time federal investigators had connected the dots between NBA insiders and gambling networks. Months earlier, in a related strand of the same broader investigation, Former Toronto Raptors player Jontay Porter had already pleaded guilty to conspiring to fix his own performance for gamblers, leaving games early, allegedly at the direction of associates looking to cash in on prop bets built around his stats. What agents were beginning to see wasn't an isolated bad actor. It was a pattern. A vulnerability sitting quietly inside the booming, multi-billion-dollar legal sports betting industry, an industry that runs almost entirely on trust, on the assumption that when a player leaves a game early, it's because of an injury, not an arrangement. For months, investigators worked to build both cases in parallel, the poker rings and the betting scheme, mapping out phone records, financial transfers, and the networks of bettors and organizers who move between rooms and cities. Then, on October 23, 2025, it all came out at once. In a coordinated, nationwide operation, the FBI arrested more than 30 defendants across 11 states. At a press conference in Brooklyn, FBI Director Kash Patel stood before reporters and didn't mince words. The allegations, he said, weren't measured in thousands of dollars. Not even millions. Patel told reporters they were looking at tens of millions in fraud, theft, and robbery, spread across a multi-year investigation. 2 federal indictments were unsealed that morning. One charged 31 defendants, including Chauncey Billups and Damon Jones, with running the rigged poker schemes, alongside members and associates of the Bonanno, Genovese, and Gambino crime families. The other charged Roger, Laster, and several co-conspirators in connection with a sports betting scheme built around inside information. Billups was arrested in Portland, Oregon, and made an initial court appearance there before the case moved to Brooklyn. The NBA suspended him indefinitely within hours. Roger was arrested that same day in Orlando. For a league that had opened its new season only days earlier, the timing could not have been worse. 2 active figures, a sitting head coach and a current starting guard, now facing federal charges, their mugshots running alongside game highlights on the same news cycle. In the weeks that followed, both men appeared in federal court and entered not guilty pleas. Billups, represented by attorney Mark Mukasey, pleaded not guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud and money laundering, and was released on a $5 million bond. Roger pleaded not guilty to the same core charges, conspiracy to commit wire fraud and conspiracy to commit money laundering, and was released on a $3 million bond secured against his Florida home. Roger's attorney, Jim Trusty, pushed back hard on the government's case, arguing publicly that the indictment didn't actually allege his client had placed a single bet, only that he'd mentioned his plans to a friend. In a December motion, Trusty asked the court to dismiss the charges altogether, citing a recent Supreme Court ruling on the legal definition of wire fraud. But the story didn't stay still. In the months that followed, federal prosecutors returned with a superseding indictment, adding new and more serious charges against Rocher, bribery in sporting contests, and honest services wire fraud conspiracy. This time, the indictment went further than before, alleging that Roger had solicited and accepted the bribe himself, and formally naming the NBA and the Charlotte Hornets as victims of the alleged conspiracy. Roger's team called it exactly what they predicted, new language for the same theory they said didn't hold up. But the case was no longer just about leaked information. It was, prosecutors now argued, about a professional athlete allegedly being paid to underperform. Meanwhile, other defendants in the sprawling case began entering guilty pleas. Damon Jones pleaded guilty for his role in schemes to defraud major sports books. Sports bettor and social media influencer Marv's Felly pleaded guilty to conspiracy, bribery, and other federal charges tied to schemes that reached beyond the NBA, allegedly touching basketball games played in the United States and in China. On the poker side of the case, prosecutors laid out the scale of the alleged fraud in even greater detail during later hearings, describing at least 25 separate rigged games, netting more than $7 million. Several defendants with direct, alleged ties to organized crime, including a man prosecutors say organized one of the games on behalf of the Genovese family, were denied bail and held in custody, while Billups and Jones were released, with prosecutors arguing that stricter conditions, including a total ban on gambling and travel restrictions, were sufficient given their circumstances. As of now, both federal cases remain active. Trial dates loom. Plea negotiations continue for some of the more than 30 defendants swept up in the two indictments. Billups remains suspended from coaching. Rozier, cut loose by the Miami Heat, remains free on bond, his season effectively over before it began. Every person named in these cases is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law. Attorneys for Billups have publicly disputed the charges against him. Rozier's legal team continues to argue the government's case doesn't hold up. What we know for certain is only what has been alleged in federal indictments, allegations that, if proven true, would represent one of the largest scandals to touch the NBA, and one of the boldest modern intersections of organized crime and professional sports, in decades. It's worth stepping back from the mugshots and the headlines for a moment. What made this alleged scheme work, if the allegations are true, wasn't really the rigged shuffling machines, or the hidden glasses, or even the mob's involvement. It was trust. Trust that a familiar face at a card table meant a fair game. Trust that a player leaving early meant an injury, not an arrangement. Trust that the person across from you wanted the same honest outcome you did. That's the thing about con games, old or new, Mafia-backed or not. They don't work because the deck is stacked. They work because nobody thinks to check. Whatever the courts ultimately decide, this case has already left a mark on how leagues police insider information, on how sportsbooks flag suspicious betting patterns, and on how easily even the most storied names in a game can find themselves, allegedly, sitting on the wrong side of the table.